Welcome to Tools to Manifest Your Dream Life with myself, Glenyce Hughes. Thank you so much for being here. I am so incredibly grateful for each and every one of you. This week is all about psychic senses, all of those clair-senses. How my psychic senses gift me information. I will discuss the different clair-senses as I go along and share how they've shown up in my life, just to give you an idea of possibly how they're showing up in your life and you don't even know it. For anybody who is new here, I have been developing my psychic senses, I would say, since 2002. That is when I attended my very first Reiki class, and it invited me to the world of energy that I knew truly nothing about previously. And I have been studying ever since. I even spent from 2003 until about 2013, so about 10 years, working as a professional medium, utilizing my psychic senses for other people all day long, along with my mediumship gifts. Now, I don't do them any longer, but some of the stories that I share today will be from readings at that time. And this is an invite into my brand new 3-part series that I have coming up March 26th, 27th, 28th, all about diving deep into your clair-senses, mastering your psychic toolkit. You will find the link above or below. If you don't see a link, reach out and I will get it for you. I would love to have you come join, and everyone who joins will get a special bonus. So make sure to check out the link if you would like that special bonus. So the first psychic sense that I want to talk about is claircognizance. This is psychic knowing. And this is one that a lot of people don't recognize when it occurs for them, because they just assume that they know, even though they maybe can't explain how they know. It just seems so natural. And for myself, it is one that I didn't know for years and years, that it was actually claircognizance. I was 16 and I desperately wanted to French braid my own hair, and I couldn't do it. I could French braid people in front of me, that was very easy, but to actually go behind my head and French braid, I couldn't figure it out. Even though I have 4 sisters, none of them wanted to help me. Imagine that. And I went to bed that night and I was so frustrated and I was so annoyed and I was so mad that I couldn't just do it myself. Imagine my surprise when the next morning I woke up and I knew how to do it. There was no explanation of how. When I went to bed, I didn't know how to do it. I woke up in the morning, I knew how to do it. And I was so proud to do it and go to school that day and show off how I'd done my own French braid. I know it sounds funny, and I didn't really think much of it, except that it always stood out as something kind of odd. As I went through my years into my 30s and started studying about psychic senses and started studying claircognizance, the psychic knowing, I was like, that's it. That's exactly what occurred. It was very clear to me that I knew what to do for there was no explanation. And actually, as I talk about that one, another one comes to mind. It was only a few years later from the French braid experience. I was 17 and I had signed up and registered and paid for training. It was for, imagine this, a radio DJ. That was the training that I was going to take once I graduated from high school. I was all ready to go. I moved up to the city from our small town, Saskatchewan. I moved to Saskatoon, the big city, to attend this training. And I woke up one morning knowing it was not the training for me. Knowing, this is the piece, not to do that, but to actually go into psychiatric nursing instead. From radio DJ to psychiatric nursing, I know it sounds so bizarre. That psychic knowing was so clear, I could not have ignored it. It is just to this day one of the clearest claircognizances that I ever received, and I'm so grateful. I am so grateful that I received it. I'm so grateful that I didn't push past it, that I went into the psychiatric nursing, because honestly, even though I've had a podcast for 12 years, I don't think radio DJ would have been for me. Clairvoyance is all about psychic seeing, and psychic seeing can show up a few different ways. It can show up where you see things in your mind, but it can also show up where you see things with your eyes. So it doesn't have to be just one or the other. It can also be psychic seeing out of the corner of your eye. Like you maybe see movement over here, you turn, there's nothing there that could have moved, but a lot of times it's our loved ones in spirit that are letting us know they're with us and such. The first time that I remember mine showing up, although I have always been extremely visual and have a really active mind, I suspect I had a lot of clairvoyant moments without recognizing it. But the first one that I remember, and again, I didn't know it was this, I was actually at the Reiki class. I was getting attuned to Reiki. And if anybody doesn't know, when you get attuned to Reiki, you basically sit quietly with your eyes closed in prayer position, and they work with the energies around you. And while she was attuning me to Reiki, I kept thinking about, I thought I was thinking, running a successful Reiki business. But it made no sense. This was my first introduction to Reiki. I never dreamed of being self-employed in my career. Imagine that. This is 23 years later of being self-employed, but prior to taking that Reiki class, it wasn't in my world. I had side gigs all the time, absolutely. But my main career was psychiatric nursing. As she was doing this, I was daydreaming, I thought, or thinking about running a successful Reiki business. And it was so weird and it was so distracting because she told me, stay present and stay focused on your breath and all the things. Again, I was brand new to it. I didn't know how to do that. And here all these thoughts kept coming. Imagine my surprise when just a few months later, I was like, I want to start a Reiki business. And so I did. That clairvoyance, again, I didn't recognize it as such. So consider that for yourself. Now, sometimes, of course, it is just those things, but make sure to acknowledge when it isn't, when there's some sort of information in it for you. The other clairvoyant one that I wanted to share with you that is one of my favorite connections when I was a professional medium. A mom and a dad came in, their son had been killed in an accident, and they came in for a reading, and as I was reading for them, he kept showing me, so in my mind, my clairvoyance, it was like a flickering light. Kept showing me a flicker on, flicker off, flicker on, flicker off. And I didn't see it as anything else. So I couldn't say it was the lamp on the table. It was just this flicker on, off, flicker on, off. And eventually it stayed on for a while. And so I'm trying to explain this to the mom and dad and assuming that they're going to think that I'm crazy the way that I'm wording it, because it's like, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. Now it's on. Oh, it's staying on. And the dad absolutely burst into tears. It was so beautiful because they owned a farm, and that son in particular was the one who always changed the yard light. So when the yard light needed changing, they actually needed to put him in the bucket of a tractor and raise it up, and so he could change the yard light because it was very high. For a few days before his funeral, the yard light went out, and it was flickering on and off at times, but for the most part it was out. And they couldn't bring themselves to have anybody else change the light at the time. When they got home from his funeral, they drove in the yard, it was just becoming dusk, and the light turned on. And from that moment to when I did the reading, it had never went off again. It had never flickered, it had never done anything. So they were very clear when I was talking about this flickering light and then it staying on, they knew exactly what I was talking about. Clairaudience is all about psychic hearing. And it could be that you hear it within your head, or that it is an actual external noise. Or it could be an external noise that is really amplified as a way to get your attention. And the first time that I experienced clairaudience was while I was gifting a Reiki session. So I'd taken the Reiki class. I hadn't started a business, although I was in the works. It was August and I started my business in September. I was doing Reiki on a good friend of mine. And I had been training myself energetically to read energies as I did Reiki sessions. And she knew that. And so she asked if I could tap into her stomach. She was having some stomach problems. She wasn't sure if she had an ulcer or what was going on. She just asked, as I did the session, if I could just tap in and see if there was any information that I could receive. And the way that I did that back then, it sounds so funny to me now, but I needed to quiet my usual monkey mind. And the way that I did that was I did multiplication tables in my mind to busy the monkey mind because I'm not very good at math. So as I'm doing Reiki on her, she's being quiet. I'm doing 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16. Anyway, you get the idea. And then usually like little bits and pieces of information would pop in. What started occurring though is that, again, I thought I was thinking it. I thought that I was thinking, tell her I love her. And I was perplexed because what a weird way to talk to myself. It's like I'm talking to myself as the third person. I don't talk to myself like that. So it was a weird thought to have, but I was busy trying to receive information. So I was like, okay, I'll tell her I'll love her later, whatever. Like I've got stuff to do here. And it kept going, and I just kept ignoring it. And then a car alarm outside, so another form of clairaudience, car alarm outside started going with like beep, beep, and the guy that was coming through who had passed started going, tell her, with the sound of the car alarm. And I was just like, what the heck is going on here? And as soon as I asked that question, I got that it was a friend of hers that had committed suicide. And it was all the things. Like I was shocked. I was freaked out a little bit. I was concerned. I was excited. I also was so excited for her, but I didn't want to put her in a bad position because I didn't know what her beliefs were of talking to people who've crossed over. For some people, it's not okay. And I didn't know what hers were. We'd never discussed it. We'd never needed to discuss it before this moment. But he had startled me enough with the car alarm that I just said, hey, you know what? Here's what's going on. Thankfully, she was very open. We had an amazing connection. It was incredible. And clairaudience for me is not something that I receive a lot. So clairvoyance is definitely number one. Clairsentience is clear feeling, where you might feel really heavy when you walk into a space where there's maybe just been a fight or something like that. Clairsentience showed up one time for me in the coolest way, I would say, and it saved me a bunch of money because we had booked a trip at that point, one of the most expensive trips we had ever taken. I believe it was like 2013, 2014. It was like a $16,000 trip. It was a 3-week all-inclusive at this 5-star luxury resort. We had our own pool. I mean, it was amazing. And there was an insurance option. We could have spent $1,000 to purchase the insurance if we needed to cancel for any reason or anything happened. On a $16,000 trip, it's not that bad, but it's still pretty high. So hubby and I talked about it. We went back and forth about it. And finally, we just said, you know what? Just having it will be worth the $1,000. It will be out of our mind in terms of like what happens if one of us got sick. So I went into my office. This was back in the day when I used a phone, like an actual corded phone. I know this was years ago. And I was going to pick up the phone and call our travel agent to tell her to add it to the purchase. It was so crazy. I could not. So my hands, I sat down on my chair. I swiveled my chair around to the phone and I couldn't lift my hands. I could not lift my hands to make the phone call. I will never forget that feeling because it was, in the first moment, it was like, what the hell? And then I realized oh, this is information. We don't need this insurance. The first moment was what's wrong with my body. The second moment was like, wow, I'm receiving the psychic information in a very bizarre way, but a way that I couldn't ignore it. If I would have phoned and got a busy signal, I could have ignored that. But by not being able to pick up my hands, oh my gosh. And I remember going, okay, and just saying it out loud, okay, we won't buy the insurance. Poof, I could move my hands. I'm like, thank you. And we had an amazing holiday and did not require the insurance. Clairgustance is psychic tasting. This is kind of a strange one for most people, and it's not something that I have had a lot of, and I'm actually really grateful for that. I'm not really that interested in tasting psychically, unless it's like cheesecake or something. But in one area, I did a lot of readings for a period of time, and there was a lot of people who worked as minors. And when I read for them, if there was a minor, like someone who had crossed over, that their job was a minor, for whatever reason, I would taste, I call it tasting pennies, because of course as a kid, I would taste pennies and they were like tinny. And that's what I would taste. I have no clue exactly why that I would get that taste. And then I just knew that person, that's the work they did. That was really the only clairgustance that I have ever received that I can remember. Anyway, you got to remember 10 years working as a professional medium. And then of course, all the years just playing with these psychic capacities. I'm sure there's been others, but that's the only one that I really clearly remember. If you get clairgustus, please post below. I would love to know how it shows up for you. Clairaudience is all about psychic smelling. Now, this is such a fun one. If the smells are good, of course. A lot of times in sessions, when the person who'd crossed over would want to come through, they would give me, if they had maybe a special perfume they always wore, without say it was lavender based, then I could smell that and I could share that with the client. Or cookies baking was often another common one, usually from grandmas, those sorts of things. But I do have to tell you this one story because it was so cool to me. And this woman had come in for a reading, and the person who came through wasn't actually who she was hoping to hear from, but she was happy to hear from her, but it wasn't who she was really looking for. It was her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law was a very heavy smoker. And back then, again, I'm really dating myself on this show, I used cassette tapes. And so I recorded on a cassette tape and then gave it to the client when they left. This woman told her husband about the reading, and her husband had no time for this sort of nonsense. He just thought she was crazy and all the things. But she said, listen, I just want to play you this part. And it was some message that his mom had sent for him. So she hit play, and he got such a whiff of cigarette smoke, and neither of them are smokers, but such a whiff of cigarette smoke that he had to use his inhaler. So he could not deny that his mother was with him while they were listening to the reading. It was so cool. He actually came in on his own for readings after that. He just knew that there was no other way that he could have had this big waft of cigarette smoke in his own house in that moment without it being his mom. Clair empathy is clear emotional feeling. This is where you can pick up the feelings of other people really easily. Sometimes we do that and we don't recognize that. So maybe we're feeling good and we go to the grocery store and we come home and we're feeling crappy and it wasn't even ours that we picked up. So it is something that you want to be, well, all of these you want to be super aware of, but that one often, if you're not acknowledging it, can really impact you. For me, clair empathy has shown up in many ways. One was, for years, I couldn't go into crowded places. It was too difficult on my body. I would feel physical pain. I don't know how else to describe it. It would just be so gross and so heavy, to the point that hubby started to notice, like this is years ago, we would go, maybe say we'd go to the big mall here in Edmonton, Alberta, West Edmonton Mall, and I'd be so excited because I had all these big plans, and then half an hour in, he would look at me and he could just tell, and he'd like, you need to go? And I'm like, yeah, I need to go. And I felt so powerless. It was so difficult, but I didn't have any tools. I didn't know what to do with it. It's just what would happen if I went into crowded places. It was just heavy and horrible. And then what I came across was a tool where if you energetically, for me anyway, it worked for me, I can't guarantee, but what I started doing was energetically expanding out to go to those places. Because what I would do when I would walk into a place that had a lot of energy is I would contract, I would pull all of my energy in, and then what happens is we maybe have a square inch or so of denseness, and that's where, with all that vast amount of energy coming in, it would feel like it was punching. Instead, if you were to actually take your energy and expand out, then you're just receiving the energy, but you're not getting punched by it. I started using that back in 2010. I still use it to this day, and I love it. I can go anywhere. I can do anything. There's no limits to being in crowded spaces. I went to a Taylor Swift concert. I mean, I can be with crowds now, and that's how I can be with crowds. So if you have that, if you are sensitive to other people's energies, then please try expanding out. And what I started doing was I would do that 30 times a day. I would just do it constantly. I would just expand my energy. And what I would do is imagine, say, a little tiny bit of me in my stomach area, and then fill my entire body, fill the entire building I'm in, fill the entire country I'm in. See, and then there's like, fill the entire earth, and then go all like way beyond the earth into the entire universe and beyond. Yeah, that expanded state, that's our natural place to be, guys. The other thing with clair empathy for me is how I can commune with animals. it is really easy when you're utilizing your clair empathy senses. Animals can use all of your psychic senses. If it's really easy for you to be with animals, if you prefer being around animals than people, chances are you've got some clair empathy in there. Clairtendency is a clear sense of touch. This is where you are psychically able to pick up information with your hands. So anytime that I did Reiki and my hands got really hot, or sometimes they got cold if there wasn't like enough energy flowing there. I also use clairtendency a lot when I first started doing my readings, because I would hold people's jewelry or something of theirs when I would do the reading, just to help me connect. And eventually I moved to phone readings. And then I would do, of course, a mix of phone or in person, and I would travel around a lot and go to different locations. And I remember when I stopped, because I had done a phone reading for a woman 6 months or a year earlier. And then because I was in her area, she came in for an in-person reading. And when I asked her for the object, she said to me, "But you didn't need one on the phone." And I was like, well, I guess I don't need them then. And it had never even crossed my mind. It had never even considered it. It was just a really cool awareness on her part. Those are the 8 clair senses. Again, I invite you to the 3-part series, deep dive into the psychic clair senses, mastering your psychic toolkit. It is on March 26th, 27th, 28th. You can check the link, the details for the time. And of course, if you're watching or listening to this later, you can always purchase the replays. Now it's your turn. I want to hear about your cool psychic stories. Go ahead and post them below. I would love to read just all of the cool, magical ways that you've received information. And have an awesome week, sweet friends. I look forward to chatting again soon.